I can tell this is a well-trained audience. You all started getting quiet as soon as Andy came up to fix the microphone, so thank you. I'm Carol Newcomb-Ludo. I'm chair of CMC's Board of Trustees. I want to welcome you all here today. Today, CMC's forum, The Future of Work, AI, Robots, and Automation, is sponsored by Accenture, Reaganomics, Steiner Public Relations, and Columbus 2020. This is really an important topic, I think, for all of us. And I'm wondering if I can be replaced at this podium, probably. Each of our sponsors are represented here by many friends and associates, so please help me thank them and welcome Joe Chanel, Health and Public Services Lead and Office Managing Director for Accenture Columbus, to introduce our speakers.
All right, thank you, Carol. Accenture is proud to support the mission of the Metropolitan Club to provide meaningful conversations and community conversations on important topics like this week. With innovation at our core, I can tell you that Accenture is particularly excited about today's topic and our VIP guests. We look forward to the exploration of artificial intelligence, automation, and how these rapidly evolving technologies will impact the future of jobs, policy, education, through the United States and throughout the world. So let's hear from our experts. Please welcome first Daryl West, founding director of the Center for Technology Innovation at Brookings, Washington, D.C., Ohio farm boy like myself, migrated east. Maybe he'll come back someday. Second, not to be outdone, my friend Dr. David Harrison, president of Columbus State Community College. Columbus State is one of the largest and most comprehensive colleges in Ohio. I'm on the foundational board, believe strongly in their mission to affordable access to higher education, and think very highly of Dr. Harrison. Third, but also tied for first, Lisa Pat McDaniel. Lisa's the president of CEO of Workforce Development Board, really important in how they engage people to find meaningful jobs and reach their potential. They partner with organizations and corporations in the community to help people find jobs, and they really perform an important role in our community. Daryl will start us off with his opening remarks. Dr. Harrison will lead the panel, and Daryl, the podium is yours. Thank you for having us today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back in Columbus. I'm actually a native Buckeye who grew up north of Cincinnati on a dairy farm. I also graduated from Miami University, so it's fun to get back to Ohio. I should give a shout out to my good friend Gene Krebs, who is here. Gene and I went to high school together. Used to be a state representative from Preble County. We both know a lot of really bad stories about each other, but we've agreed to keep our mouths shut. So today I'm going to talk about the future of work and the impact of emerging technologies, and it's based on a book that just came out entitled The Future of Work. And what I argue in the book is that we're about to undertake an unprecedented era of technology innovation. The pace of innovation is going to accelerate. We're going to see it in terms of autonomous vehicles, and I know there's a lot of interest here in Columbus in next generation transportation, and Honda has a big presence here. Uber has already ordered 24,000 autonomous vehicles with delivery starting next year. So we're not talking about that self-driving car revolution taking place 5 or 10 years from now. Literally next year, in many places around the country, you're going to see them on the road. Ditto in terms of robotics. There have been amazing advances in that field. About a month ago, I was in California and gave a talk at Google X, which is the futuristic arm of Google, and they're very excited about robotics and some of the opportunities there. And then, of course, artificial intelligence also is taking off and being deployed in many sectors, finance, healthcare, education, and elsewhere. But what people are worried about is just what are all these emerging technologies going to mean in terms of society, the economy, commerce, and general communications. People are worried, as Jane noted, like, am I going to get replaced? I was telling Jane, fortunately, he and I are old enough, we don't have to worry about this. But if you're under the age of 40, during your adult lifetime, you will see certain workforce ramifications. I think one of the best studies, there have been wildly differing estimates from a 10% workforce impact up to over 50%. But I think the best study is by McKinsey, and they are projecting that 5% of current jobs are fully automatable. But then they go on to add that 30% of the activities in 60% of jobs are going to be subject to automation. And this really helps us understand why there is such a wide disparity in the predictions, because the question is, at what point do employers start to replace people? You know, if there can be automation for 30% of what you're doing, you're probably safe. But then once that percentage starts to rise up to 50, 60, or 70%, then the risk of automation does start to kick in. But I think beyond the issue of job impact, we also have to think about the possible impact on incomes as well as benefits. Because at the same time that we're going through this era of technology revolution, we're also seeing big changes in business models, the rise of the sharing economy. Lots of employers are shifting to temporary workers, short-term employees, contract employees, independent contractors, and so on, which basically means jobs with lower incomes and sometimes without health care benefits attached to them. And so these are the types of issues that we as a society really need to be thinking about now. We're fortunate that our national unemployment rate is 3.8%, so the employment issue is not apparent now, but we basically have 10 to 20 years to kind of get our act together in terms of how we are going to move forward and deal with the possible ramifications. In terms of the types of jobs that are most subject to automation, certainly many entry-level jobs. For example, we're seeing a lot of mobile and digital applications in the retail sector. So right now there are 8 million sales clerks in the United States. Those jobs are very much at risk. Truck driving is going to be an occupation at risk. There are 2.5 million truck drivers in America. As autonomous vehicles come in. There are 1.5 million taxi drivers and ride-sharing service drivers. And again, autonomous vehicles are going to affect those types of jobs as well. But it's not just going to be entry-level jobs. There are going to be white-collar jobs and professional jobs that also are becoming subject to these emerging technologies. I know healthcare is a big and growing sector in the greater Columbus area. Healthcare is seeing a lot of technology starting to come into that space in terms of clinical decision support for doctors to help keep them up to date on the latest studies that are coming out. Radiologists, we're discovering there are AI solutions that if you feed them enough CAT scans and X-rays and tell them this is a normal reading and this is an abnormal reading, that the AI system can learn to distinguish. And basically, some of these AI systems are showing accuracy rates of up to about 90%. So humans are still better at reading the CAT scans, but we're not that much better. And those AI systems are getting better and better. Now, of course, we know that emerging technologies also is going to create jobs, so we shouldn't just focus on possible job losses. There's certainly going to be many new opportunities. Anything involving data will be golden. E-commerce is really going to take off. Right now, e-commerce represents about 10% of the retail sales, but within a decade, that number is going to rise to about 30%. My nephew actually runs Bren's Pizza, a local pizza place here, and I visited with him this morning. He told me already 40% of his orders are coming in through either his online platform or a mobile application. So the whole e-commerce area certainly is going to create a lot of jobs. In medicine, biomedicine, drug discovery, and clinical testing, we will see many different applications. But the risk is, during this transition period, people may not have the skills that are going to be required for the new jobs that are being created. And so Dave will be happy to hear this. Community colleges are going to be at the front lines of worker retraining. This could end up being the golden age of community colleges because we're really going to need them for this retraining function. But I think that we're kind of at a stage now very similar to where America was 100 years ago when the country was moving from an agrarian to an industrial economy. And it was a long and somewhat chaotic and torturous time period. It took almost 30 years to kind of work through that transition, but we did a lot of economic and political reforms at that time. We developed Social Security, unemployment compensation, added an income tax requirement to the Constitution in order to pay for new programs. We expanded the electorate. Women got the right to vote. We moved to direct election of senators. Previously, they were appointed by state legislatures. So there were a variety of both economic and political reforms that basically helped workers navigate that transition to the industrial economy and enabled our governance system, which in 1900 was pretty sad and pathetic, to operate on a better basis and actually start to resolve problems. So today when people ask me, am I an optimist or a pessimist in terms of emerging technologies going forward, I tell them, I can do optimism or I can do pessimism. You tell me what you want and I'll do it for you. But the real answer is actually the crucial variable that I see in terms of whether 30 years from now we end up in utopia or dystopia is really governance. Is our political system up to the task of addressing problems, solving problems, and coming up with creative and new ideas? I know in the discussion phase, we're going to kind of talk about things that we can do moving forward to help workers in this transition to the digital economy. So if we can get our act together and actually get serious about talking about possible remedies, I actually am very optimistic that by 2050, our country will be in a very strong position. People will be in a better position. They'll probably be able to work fewer hours and have more time to pursue hobbies, interests, music, culture, sports, whatever your particular avocation is. But if we don't start to have these conversations now, and if we don't get the policy solutions right, we actually could end up in a dystopia that is worse for many more people. So with that, I will turn the conversation over to Dave, and he will lead us through the rest of this. Thank you.
I'll be the first to weigh in. We prefer optimism. And on that note, it's great to see this room full. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this important discussion. At Columbus State, the future of work really has become thematic for our own leadership and strategic work. We've got a lot of Columbus State folks here today. I'm not going to ask them to raise their hand because you will be intimidated. But whatever organization you're from, we have you outnumbered. And we've also got some great employer partnerships. I think we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about it, but AEP, Honda, Nationwide, Joe and his team at Accenture, we've got folks leaning in to help figure this out in Central Ohio now. And really, Daryl, want to hear from you as to how we can accelerate work that's already happening. I do want to bring Lisa Pat McDaniel into the conversation to start. And Lisa, just ask, is there anything that surprised you based on reading Daryl's book or what he just had to say?
How really good the book was, I think. So.
You should all know that we're both Miami grads together, so we already have lots of connections. But no, I think what surprises me more than anything is you said you could be a pessimist or an optimist. I like to think of myself as an optimistic pessimist. But the board, I think what is surprising just in thinking about all of this, many of you may have seen Business First. A company just got an infusion of additional capital, second round of capital. I think the company's name is Olive. And what they're going to be doing is they've invented AI systems that will do all of the paperwork in healthcare so that caregivers, doctors, nurses, et cetera, can spend more of their time focused on patients. And when you think about, I know when I go into a doctor's office and I see all of the paperwork I'm handed to fill out, I was particularly happy about that. But when I read your book and then I see that right in front of me this morning, I thought, my goodness, we don't have time to plan at all. We're here and we need to move as things are happening right this very minute as we sit here. The board, the Workforce Development Board, and I have 2 tables, Dave. Do you have 2 tables? Some of our board members are. Darn. Some
We
of
have
my
3 and we're on your board, so.
That's right. So I have board members here with me, and the board will agree that we see ourselves not only as helping job seekers. We operate the Job Center, and anybody can come to that Job Center. And I know many of you were here the last time I sat here and heard me talk about that. But also as a strategy body to start, not to start, but to continue to think about how do we move forward in this new era that we're coming on. And we will be actually, interestingly enough, we will be taking on a research project to take a look at what kind of disruption can we expect here in Central Ohio. And while we're already, like the duck, calm on the surface, paddling like heck underneath, trying to figure out how we get those in our community into getting caught up with this current skills, let alone making sure they have the right skills moving forward, because I believe you predicted that the kinds of jobs people will be able to have, the jobs that are not replaced by AI, will require so much higher knowledge and skill levels. And we're still dealing with people who don't even have the basic skill levels we all have, many of us do in this room. So the board's vision is to be working very hard to get those people skilled, but looking ahead and saying, okay, this is where we're going, and how do we get those people skilled up? And if that's not what's going to happen, if some of those people are going to be left behind, what do we need to do to help those people survive, frankly? So.
I do want to come back to that point because I think that's something that a lot of us are concerned about. Joe, I want to come back to you. You touched on your remarks. In your book, you go into some depth about the jobs that are going to go away. Like you say, that may not matter to me and you, but we've got a lot of young people in the room and a lot of people who influence young people. What advice would you have for folks who are just starting their career? What do they need to be thinking about?
Well, the funny thing is, when I look at my adult life, I've been very fortunate that I've had 2 employers. So I taught for a number of years at Brown University, and then 10 years ago I moved to the Brookings Institution. When I talk to young people, I tell them, you're not going to have that kind of experience. There's going to be more job churn. There's going to be more people moving from job to job just because every sector is going to get disrupted. Some sectors like finance and retail are going to get disrupted very quickly. Other sectors, education and healthcare, are going to take a little longer. But eventually, over a 10, 20, and 30-year time horizon, every sector is going to be disrupted. So what we're going to need in a situation where people might have 6, 7, 8, or 9 different employers during the course of their lifetime, and where they might be shifting not just across companies, but even across sectors, we're going to need to invest in lifetime learning. Like the old model where we basically invest in people's education up through about age 25, and then after that you're on your own, we need, I tell young people, they're going to have to constantly upgrade their job skills because their jobs are going to change. I can see it even in my own life, like my job has changed even in the last 10 years. So I think that's where places like community colleges will be very important because people are going to need to get skills in a lot of different ways from community colleges, online education, certificate programs. Like, they're going to be a whole variety, and every part of society is going to have to step up. How are we going to pay for that? In the book, I call for the creation of citizen learning accounts, kind of like an IRA for education, that people can contribute on a tax-advantaged basis to this account. Perhaps their employers can match the account. And then when they need to do that job skill upgrading, they have the financial means to pay for it.
Lisa, you touched on the folks that aren't ready for the current economy as the vision that Daryl lays out comes to reality. What do we need to be doing to help them make sure that they come along?
Well, I believe, first of all, the whole community, we all have to be concerned about this. And we have to be concerned about it because from business and industry to our nonprofit sector to government, if people aren't able to make a living, then guess what? They don't have extra money to pay for anything else. And our economy, which currently is based on consumerism, we can't continue to operate if people aren't able to buy things, right? And so if for no other reason, you should be concerned if you're in the private sector, especially about that. So we need to be making sure right now that our K through 12, and actually I would argue minute you're born through 12, needs to be really incorporating technology. The last time I sat up here, I said I truly believe kids should be learning how to code, and they should be understanding how technology works. Whether they're going to grow up and work in technology doesn't matter. It's a key skill. It's a key understanding, just like reading and math, our history. And we need to be pushing for that. If we were starting to do that now, by the time kids are coming up through 12th grade, or however the education system may be organized as we move into the future, because I'm not sure it will be looking the same, I think we need to, I know at the board, we are very concerned with trying to find those people who are currently working 70 hours, because we know they understand what it means to work. And we know they have those basic skills, trying to figure out how do we get to them and get them to upgrade skills now. And certainly that includes the community college, stackable credentialing, where people can get credentials in a relatively short amount of time, access jobs and get additional credentialing. We need to think outside the box as to how we deliver training. Some of that may be and can be online based on the internet. There's lots of places people can go if they don't have access to that in their own home, including our partnership with the library. We have a partnership right now with the Metropolitan Library. And we need to be, everybody needs to understand that you have agency. You're responsible for your own learning. You have to be constantly learning. And by constantly learning and expanding your skills, the fact that you're in one job or career path today and next year you actually move to a different one isn't as daunting because you've learned how to learn. And but to answer your base question, we have to figure out how to get to those people who are already working 70 hours. They just don't have the skills that this new economy is going to take. And we're going to have to think outside the box, whether that means delivering training while people are on the job, figuring out how we subsidize people so they can go to get training. The idea of accounts that help to pay for that learning now is something we've actually looked at, and a group of us actually put at the Alliance for America's Future as one of the potential ideas that could get funded, that kind of an idea. So I think those are the things that we need to be doing.
Adam said I was allowed to participate, so I'm gonna. We do have, I think, a really good foundation. We got miles to go, but we're off to a good start in a lot of key areas in Central Ohio. At Columbus State, we talk about not helping students get jobs, but helping them prepare for the second job. If you think about your own careers, it's really the second job that really got you independence, that really got you launched into a field that matters. One of the issues is those first jobs are going away. And the second job then becomes the first job, and that gap gets even broader. We've got employers who are actively engaged in this. They recognize it. They're working with us to identify, look, in 12 to 24 months, these jobs are likely to go away, be dramatically changed. These are good people that are in these jobs. How can we partner with Columbus State to close that gap with regard to current employees? One of the sources is, again, props to our employers for thinking creatively. Employer tuition reimbursement is really an important part of this, and I think more and more of them are starting to see this as a strategic benefit, certainly to employees, but also to help close the talent gap in their firms, but then also in the community. It calls a broader question, though, that you talk a lot about, Daryl. There are already structural inequities in the current system. In Columbus, we are proud of the economic growth we've had, but we know we've still got income inequality and economic mobility issues. You make a pretty compelling case that if we do nothing, those are going to get worse fast. What should we do to address that if we know that's coming?
No, you're exactly right. Inequality issues are a big challenge going forward, and they actually could get worse before they get better. Part of the issue is geographic disparities across the regions. Like, if you look at venture capital investments right now nationwide, 3/4 of the VC money goes into 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. And so, all these areas in between, the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain states, the Deep South states, are just not attracting sufficient venture capital. And to the extent that venture capital predicts future economic activity, this becomes very important. My colleagues in our Metropolitan Studies program at Brookings did a study. They found that right now, only 15% of American counties generate 64% of GDP. Basically, what they're arguing is most of our country's GDP comes on the East Coast and the West Coast, and then a few dynamic metro areas in between. And with those VC numbers, that disparity could grow even wider. So what a place like Columbus has to worry about is to make sure that it's investing in infrastructure, and not just physical infrastructure, but digital infrastructure, because as I mentioned, like in a decade, e-commerce is going to be 30% of all retail sales. So everything is going online, everything is going mobile. It's just a question of how long it takes to get there. So we need to invest in the digital part of infrastructure. We need to make sure there's a better balance geographically in terms of economic development, venture capital investments, and so on. In most communities, it's kind of the eds and the meds that are driving a lot of economic development, meaning the medical establishments, the hospitals, and the educational institutions, so kind of investing in biomedicine and doing things like that. I think Central Ohio has a lot of advantages. You have great universities, a trained workforce. It's relatively inexpensive compared to the East Coast and the West Coast. There are tech companies that are basically no longer telling their employees, we want you to come to San Francisco or Seattle or Boston. It's like, we want you to go to Columbus, Indianapolis, Denver, or Austin, just because they need to diversify their workforce, and they need kind of real estate costs that are cheaper than what we find. So I think Central Ohio is well positioned, but it needs to make sure the infrastructure investments take off and that the venture capital investments are equitably distributed.
You all having these conversations at your board? I think you are, Lisa. Are you hearing the same thing from employers? Or they're trying to hire new people, but at the same time they've got a current workforce that they've got to upskill?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I mean, what we're hearing a lot right now, of course, is that there are a lot of jobs that are going unfilled here in the community. On the other hand, when you look at some of the jobs that are very difficult to hire for and going unfilled, are some of the jobs that I think will be the first ones to start to disappear as things become more and more taken over by technology. But in some ways, that's a great thing, because I'm not sure many of those jobs provide the kind of deep satisfaction for a person long term. So in some ways, the good news is that those jobs will go away. But we, right now, in the immediate, right this minute, there are a lot of jobs that are going unfilled, and a lot of employers are having a very difficult time attracting people into those jobs, number one. And although they may be willing to take people and then train them, even being able to find people to do that. So they're not finding people with the right skills, and even when they're willing to do the training, they're not finding people who are willing to take those jobs, and then they train them. We see in several parts of the economy here in different sectors where you have incumbent workers who need to be upskilled in order to maintain the jobs that they have and in order for those companies to continue to prosper. And so there's actually not a lot of outside dollars for that. There are some outside dollars, but not enough. And so companies really need to be investing in that kind of training now for themselves. And I know that those efforts are going on at Nationwide, which is, I think, actually brilliant to be doing, is to understand that you have to invest in your own workforce and skill them up. And I know that you're involved in that as well at the community college. So we are definitely hearing those things. And you know, we're helping people to understand what could be some possible solutions in the near term.
Daryl, in your book and in your remarks, you touched on the fact that this isn't the first time in our history that we've had some form of economic disruption, the Industrial Revolution, World War II. Can we learn from that history, or is this so different that we're starting from scratch? What do you recommend in that regard?
I think we can learn from history. What I learned when I think about earlier periods of technological change. The key thing, I think, in this era is to think big, because I don't think we're in a situation where small-scale incremental solutions are going to get us where we go. Like if we're kind of aiming for utopia and trying to avoid dystopia, we're going to need large-scale changes in our social contract. We have to reimagine the social contract. We need to think about kind of separating benefits, healthcare and retirement benefits, from jobs, which is more of a European model than a typically American model. In America, our jobs basically provide the healthcare benefits. But in an era of job churn, that may not be the right way to go. So we may need to kind of think about new models there. I'm reminded that Charles Darwin had this famous quote about evolution where he talked about survival goes not to the strongest or the most intelligent, but to the most adaptable. And I think the ingredient that we really need today is agility and adaptability. Like, those are the types of skills. And it's not just the skills, but in terms of our creative imagination, we just need to be more agile. And I think what makes me optimistic going forward is just thinking historically, like, our country faced great challenges at many points over the last 200 years, and on almost every occasion, we stepped up and we were creative. We made major changes, we did the right thing, and our country emerged in a much stronger position. There is no reason why, even though I think the workforce disruptions are going to be substantial in the next 1 to 2 decades, they are perfectly within our means to handle. They're not so substantial that we can't deal with them. It's a question of will, it's a question of creativity, and it's a question of agility.
And do you think it's, just to add on, do you think it's also how quickly we are willing to do that now, to start to abandon and move towards that change, like now, not waiting for it to hit us? And that's what I'm afraid, you know, when we talk about, even now when we talk about higher education as an example, and changing that mentality that everyone should go to a 4-year college, which I did, and I wanted, my daughters did, and I was happy about that. But to start to abandon those kinds of thinkings for new thinking, knowing that, yes, that's not what we experienced, but that's not what our children and our children's children will need to experience. They're going to have to do things a completely different way, and we've got to let go of, in some cases, our own nostalgia for the way we did it, to make sure that they move forward in a new and different way and help them to embrace that. And us too, although I'm over 40, so I guess I don't have to worry about this stuff either. I thought there's a positive about being over 40. Who knew?
You're okay. You don't have to worry about it.
Oh, thank you.
But you're right that if we start to think about the changes that are necessary, and if we start to make them now, it's actually going to be pretty easy. Because when you look at the adoption scale of the various things I'm talking about, autonomous vehicles, robots, AI, and so on, it's going to take a while. Basically, we have 30 years to get this right. if we make changes now, we can actually do it in a way that's not so disruptive, and it'll put us in a good position. What I worry the most about is we're actually not having the conversation about how to reimagine the social contract, how to kind of rethink the nature of the workforce, rethink the nature of education. If we wait 10 years, the problem gets a lot more serious. If we wait to 2040, the problem is like a full-force hurricane at that point, and then our ability to deal with it, the problem may be too big. So that's the reason I wrote the book now, because we need to start those changes right now.
Quick point of business, it's an important part of the CMC process for audiences to participate. So we'll move to a Q&A here shortly. If you do have a question for anyone on our panel, please line up in front of one of the microphones. And I think there's one back there. I want to come back to your book, Daryl. You paint a picture that politics is going to play an important role in getting this right. I don't want to say it was a bleak picture, but it wasn't on the optimistic side of your point. But we do feel pretty good about the assets we have in Columbus and in Central Ohio, and we talk openly about the Columbus way, where the public sector and the private sector are working closely together towards common ends. The private sector within the private sector are working closely together. There's a level of collaboration here that really is expected. It's part of our day job. How can we use that to our advantage? Or can there be a local response to something that really is public policy driven?
I think Columbus is actually pretty well positioned in a lot of respects to deal with these issues, in the sense that I've been very impressed just in talking with people here, just the spirit of collaboration that exists, and just the fact that so many people came here today to hear a conversation like this that indicates a very forward-looking place. And I've heard stories about how government and business works well together here, which is not the situation in most major metropolitan areas, and it's certainly not the case in my hometown of Washington, D.C., as all of you well know. So I think there are governance challenges. Localities are pretty well positioned if they have their governance act together. There are lots of things that local communities can do just to encourage collaboration, make sure that the universities and the community colleges are kind of setting up their curriculum in a way that students will have the skills that employers need. The biggest complaint I hear from the business community on workforce development is the programs aren't producing people with the skills that we actually need. And so people go through these programs and end up not getting jobs, which is frustrating for everyone. So as long as the lines of communication are open, which seems to be the case here in Columbus, I think there are many benefits of that type of place.
Is there a best case scenario? Is there an opportunity for us to look back 10 or 20 years from now and say AI and robotics have closed the income gap, have improved economic mobility, have improved people's standard of living across the board?
I think it's going to be hard to make that argument unless we have additional policy responses to technology innovation. One of the things I do in the book is just look at the stock market valuations of leading technology companies versus the size of their workforces. So, for example, Facebook is about a $1 billion company right now in terms of its stock market valuation. They have 25,000 employees, meaning, and that's the whole point of an internet platform, that you can basically scale up fast and have billions of customers, but you don't need that many workers. You look at all of the major technology companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and so on, there are very few of them that have more than 100,000 employees. Apple is on the verge of becoming a $1 trillion company in terms of its valuation. I think they have like 125,000 employees. So this is not like the General Motors and the AT&Ts of 30 and 40 years ago, where they had 500,000 people working for them and 600,000. And so this is the inequality risk that technology concentrates wealth without necessarily producing a large number of jobs. So that's kind of the challenge we have to think about.
It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. In fairness to all, we'd like to get to as many questions as possible. Please avoid editorial comments. Questions should end with a question mark. And let's get started. First question, please.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Rick Neal. I'm a candidate for Congress here, and so I'm very much looking forward to helping you with your governance issues starting in January. I'm happy to hear about you talk about disruption in particular, because I think that that's definitely something that we need to be concerned about. Here's my issue, and my question is about communities that have traditionally been left behind throughout our country's history, and in previous disruptions, I would assume will be left behind again unless we are proactive about it. And so that might mean prioritizing rural communities and communities of color in the kind of work that you're talking about. At the same time, we are in a political environment now where some of our political leaders seem all too happy to scapegoat certain communities for political gain. And so my question is, how do those two things intersect, given what the rhetoric is, from some of our political leaders, like the president, scapegoating people for political gain with these communities that are going to be left behind by this economic disruption? How do we deal with those two issues coming together?
I mean, in a lot of respects, I'm a big believer in technology, and I personally love a lot of technology, and I love the latest gadgets, but we do have to make sure that everybody shares in the benefits of the technology revolution. So right now, I think the last number I saw was about 82% of Americans have home access to broadband, but that means 18% do not, and they are disproportionately concentrated in rural communities, among senior citizens, and in communities of color. So, we need to close that gap. Part of that is just greater investment. My sister, until quite recently, was still running dial-up at home, which was a personal embarrassment to me, as somebody who studies technology. Jean, don't tell her I announced that to the crowd. But, it's like in rural communities, when I used to go home and visit my mother, it's like I could not get a signal at her house. If I went 10 miles north or 10 miles south of there, I got a signal. So there certainly is a big need for rural broadband, and we need to kind of make sure that everybody is able to gain the benefits that we want.
Next question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corinne Warapa. I'm a parent first. I'm a healthcare provider, and I'm also a public policy consultant. I have a quick question. Do you have any knowledge of either local or national efforts to really harness the brain power of anyone under the age of 21 in helping to solve some of these issues and kind of, do some of the harnessing of those great ideas that most young people usually have, especially during times of disruptive forces? Just curious.
Yes. So we, at the board, in partnership with the County Job and Family Service Agency, we jointly run a program referred to as AMP. But what it essentially is, it's a program, and we also, in school youth and students who have fallen out of school, so helping them to finish up school and get on a career path. We are working with them. Actually, we had a fantastic program this summer with the PAST Foundation, where we brought a group of kids over to the PAST Foundation to learn about all different ways of creating media, robotics, looking at problem solving in a variety of different ways to help basically get them to understand and use their creative mind to look at problems from new and different ways. And I think by us continuing to do that and ask them, what do you want to see for your future? What do you think is going to happen? To help them to understand that they have agency, they have the ability to affect that kind of change. And I've seen it in other programs across the region, but that's what I know at the board, what we're doing specifically. I don't know if you have seen anything. No? But they're the ones who will face the bulk of this, right? And they are the ones who can creatively solve those problems, and we should listen to them now.
Are those problems happening at the levels in communities that are disenfranchised as well, or is it more for
the primary participants are communities who are disenfranchised?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, I'm Tony Guglielmato. Thanks for your involvement today. My question involves the fact that AI is advancing, it seems like, at light speed. And someone up there mentioned that our adoption of it is going to require agility and adaptability. That does not describe our state and federal government. What risk do we face if our government officials can't see that this is going to change our country?
Well, the risk is if our government officials don't step up to the plate in ways that I think all of us would like them to do, we're going to end up in dystopia in 30 years. Like, that's the risk. The pessimistic interpretation is basically we just keep going the way we are. There's workforce disruption, there are people who get left behind, they're upset, there's an increase in substance abuse, there's more violence, there's more domestic violence in families. It's like the situation deteriorates rapidly. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are affirmative steps that we can take, and again, history is a good guide. We know in terms of what we have done that has positioned America for strength in the future. It's infrastructure investment, it's education investment, it's worker retraining, and it's reimagining the social contract. That's what we've done in the past, and it worked well. If you look at other countries in terms of how they're doing it, that's what they're doing. I go to a lot of international conferences. I was in Norway last year. Their government is on this issue. They see that it's happening. They're worried about what it's going to mean for Norway. They're thinking now, how do we need to change local programs? How do we need to change government policy? They're setting up pilot projects. They're experimenting with different means of delivery. They're looking at liberal ideas and moderate ideas and conservative ideas with evidence testing along the way and trying to determine, okay, what works in this particular time period. That's what we need to do right now.
And can I just add, we are our government. Our government is not something separate from us, people. We are our government, and we've got to remember that. And when they're not responding to these, when people we've sent to government to operate are not responding to these very real issues, we are our government, so we are the ones who need to do something about it. So I just want to point that out.
So my name is Bill Wayhoff, and I'm with Steptoe and Johnson PLC. So one of the magic words that was just mentioned is infrastructure. And we can have all of the AI and the virtual jobs, but there's a big shortage of craft folks, carpenters and plumbers and pipe fitters to build the infrastructure. What do we have in Columbus that will help us overcome those shortages in the central Ohio area? Because all these companies that focus on virtualization need bricks and mortar to house their people because they like to see each other, and collaborate. So. Okay.
So right now, the county has a program called Building Futures, and Building Futures is essentially a pre-apprenticeship program where we are basically bringing in people from disenfranchised communities and communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in the trades into a pre-apprenticeship program. So in that program, we help them to make sure that they have the skills necessary, math and reading. We introduce them, and I shouldn't say we, actually, it's the Trade Council, all of the trades together, and Impact, which is primarily working on this program. And they take the people, they introduce them to all the different trades. By the end of the program, people have chosen a trade they want to go into, and they're prepped specifically for that trade, so at the end of the program, they can go directly into that apprenticeship. We just did our first cohort. We ended up graduating 22 people, and we are currently moving towards a second cohort for that. But again, part of that issue is, which could be a whole nother CMC panel, is parents not encouraging their children to understand that that's a career pathway, one that will get you into middle-class wages in the current economy rather quickly. But that is something that we're trying to do.
Hi, my name's Burl Pickle Antonio, and I serve as school board president in Gahanna. And I'm going to ask you about the agility and adaptability comments also. That makes a lot of sense to me, especially given that we don't really know what the jobs for our young students are going to look like in the future. But we hear a lot the message of, I guess, workforce training, specific jobs training. And I guess I would be curious to hear your thoughts related to pre-K through 12 education. What is it that you think that we should be doing? Should we be doing something differently to make sure that our kids are best prepared for whatever these jobs are in the future?
I mean, I think we do need to rethink pre-K to 12 pretty systematically, in the sense that there are a lot of people coming out that are not prepared for the jobs that we already know are coming in the 21st century, let alone, as you point out, the jobs that we don't know but are going to be coming out soon. So what I tell young people is, I think there's still a place for a liberal arts education. It's good to have a broad background. I certainly benefited from that. But you need concrete job skills attached to that. And the concrete job skill can be anything. It could be computer skills, data skills, being a good plumber, being an electrician, being, whatever. We know that there's going to be a need for all those things. But the particular qualities that will be needed in the 21st century that is a little different than what we've had in the past is like skills of teamwork and collaboration and communications and cutting across disciplines and kind of ending the silos, because most problems today are interdisciplinary in nature, so you can't just hire one type of person and expect that person to have the skills and background necessary to solve the problem. It's like, increasingly companies are bringing together people from different kinds of backgrounds, forcing them to work together and trying to get creative solutions out of that. So it's like getting young people who are able to operate well in that type of setting, I think will be a big plus going forward.
I think it's also got to be a focus on making sure young people of all ages understand that education isn't an event. That education is something that is going to continue throughout not just your career, but your lifetime. And we've talked about lifelong learning most of my career. I think it's really becoming more operational in all of our organizations, government, the private sector, and certainly in community colleges. Last question, sir.
I'm Mike Moses. My question is for Mr. West. Are there any trends or schools of thought that the AI or robotics might actually create a new sector of jobs, another new type of job? And more specifically, are there any employers that you're aware of or companies that have just decided that they're not going to lay off somebody because they're no longer necessary because of AI or robotics, and they're going to take that institutional knowledge or business expertise and try to use it to create another job or give them some other job in the company?
Okay, that's a great closing question. I think in the short run, AI and robotics are more likely to be used to augment human performance as opposed to replace humans, in the sense that there are ways in which AI systems and robotic systems will allow us to perform at a higher level, because they can either automate the easy stuff, and that frees us for the more complicated and creative parts, or they have access to processing information that can then help us make better decisions. So I think in the short run, I'm less worried about that. I think when you start talking about 10 and 20 years down the road, that may no longer be the case, because the AI systems are going to get better. At that point, they will be replacing people and not just augmenting human performance, and that will become a much bigger challenge at that point.
Please join me in thanking this great panel.
I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. I found it enlightening. I'm also now breathing a sigh of relief. I'm old enough I don't have to worry about being replaced too much, except my grandchildren might not agree with that. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, including the Hilton Downtown for providing accommodations for our speaker, Accenture, Reaganomics, Steiner Public Relations, Columbus 2020, and Improving, and of course our speakers. Thank you again. I hope to see you all next week.